Governor Barr, thank you so much for sitting down with me. It is great to have you on Yahoo Finance.
My pleasure to be here.
I want to start the conversation with the grand jury's subpoenas that were served to the central bank by the Department of Justice and the investigation into Chair Powell. How did you learn about it? And when you did, what was your reaction? How did you feel? How do you see this?
Well, I think Chair Powell's statement from last Sunday was clear and direct on this point. It is an assault on the independence of the Fed, as was the earlier assault on Governor Cook. And I think these are just examples of the ways in which the independence of the Fed is being challenged. And I want to assure your listeners that we are acting only for economic reasons. We are acting only according to our congressional mandate. That's to make sure that we have price stability and maximum employment. That's what we've been focused on all along, and that's what we will stay focused on.
Are you worried that the independence of the Federal Reserve is under threat? And will you personally take steps to protect that independence?
As I said, we are acting only for congressionally mandated reasons. We're acting only in order to assure maximum employment and price stability. That's what we have been doing. That's what we will be doing. And the best way to demonstrate that to the American people is to do that.
Let's talk about inflation. We got some new readings on inflation this week. CPI on a core basis has been sitting at 2.6% for the past 4 months. We also got some readings on wholesale inflation. How are you looking at inflation now, as well as specifically the impact of tariffs on prices? And how much signal are you taking from the data now, given that we are still seeing a bit of a lingering impact from the government shutdown?
Well, the recent inflation data reinforces the concerns that I've had that inflation remains elevated. In core PCE terms, it's been hovering at about 3% over the last year. Services prices inflation has started to come down. Goods price inflation has been rising. Those are kind of offsetting. The balance is that inflation has been too high over the last year. We had a period of time where we made substantial progress from 2022 to 2025. That progress right now has flattened out, and we need to continue to do the work necessary to bring inflation all the way back down to our 2% target. Tariffs are having an effect on prices. We're seeing goods prices rise. The question is, will that be a one-time event where they rise and then they're done rising, and then we'll start to see inflation fall back towards our target? Or might we see persistence of that? And that's really what I'll be focused on the inflation front.
And what's your perception now? Do you see a risk of inflation becoming persistent, especially when you looked at the Beige Book and we saw some of the anecdotal evidence there when you looked at the PPI report?
Well, I do think we're going to continue to see goods prices rising in the early part of this year. I think a reasonable base case is that price increases stop going up once tariffs are fully incorporated into prices. But there's a significant risk that they don't, and that's the risk that we have to watch out for. So we're looking at the labor market, we're looking at the inflation side, we're balancing those risks. I think right now we're in a good place in terms of our interest rate policy to be able to take some time and really assess the inflation effects over the course of the next year.
I do want to get to the path on policy, but you also mentioned the job market, and the Fed cut rates 3 times the tail end of last year on concerns about the job market. Right. We got the December employment report. The unemployment rate dropped to 4.4%. Do you think things are stabilizing now in the job market, albeit perhaps at a lower level?
The job market does appear to be stabilizing. It's a little early to know for sure. We're still working our way through the data. It'd be useful to have some more data at the early part of next year to assess that. As you said, it's stabilizing at a very low level. So if you look at net job creation, it's hovering close to zero. The reason that the unemployment rate has stayed low and has stopped going up is that labor force growth is also very close to zero. Both those numbers might be a little positive, they might be a little negative, but if you think about it, we're not seeing a lot of dynamism in the labor market. On the positive side, it's a very low firing environment. We're not seeing a lot of layoffs of significant size. But on the downside, we're not seeing a lot of hiring. We're not seeing a lot of net new job creation. And so when you have that kind of low level of activity in the labor market, that does present a risk going forward that we need to watch carefully.
When you look at both sides of your dual mandate, are you more worried about inflation now versus the job side, or how are you looking at things now?
I think the risks are pretty much in balance. That's why I think that we're in a good place in terms of interest rate policy to look at those risks going forward. A reasonable base case is that the labor market is continuing to stabilize and that inflation will continue to come down to 2%. But there are risks to both sides of the mandate, given the low level of job creation, risk to the employment side, given the potential persistence of inflation, risk to the inflation side of the mandate. So I really do think we're going to have to take some time to really assess the incoming data. Really until the spring, we're going to have effects of the government shutdown playing into biases in the data for technical reasons on both the employment side and the inflation side. So we have to try and make adjustments for that. We need to treat the data, with some caution, and that will play through really into the spring.
So we're less than 2 weeks away from your policy meeting. You said you're in a good place with policy right now. If the meeting were tomorrow, would you hold rates steady?
Well, we always take things on a meeting-by-meeting basis. We still have a couple weeks till the meeting. I would say that I think we're in a good place on policy. We can take some time to make a judgment about how the economy evolves, how the data is evolving, what the forecast might look at, the balance of risks. But right now, I think we're in a good place.
Looking farther out towards the end of the year, I recognize we're in January. A lot of things can change. But do you perceive any adjustments to the policy rate, perhaps later this year, any rate cuts?
Well, I don't think it makes sense to lock in. We really need to know what is the data telling us and how is our forecast evolving, how are the risks evolving. But I think we can take some time really to assess the incoming data because our policy is in a good place. It is balancing both of those risks, I think, quite well. Right now, we're in what most people think of as the wide range of neutral. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important for us to be careful to take our time to get it right.
How restrictive do you think you are right now?
We're really in the range of neutral right now. Mm-hmm. So,
okay.
You can think of estimates around that, but.
Okay. Sort of switching gears, President Trump set to announce a new Fed chair soon. We know that he wants someone who is in favor of lower rates. How do you see the dynamic of a new Fed chair playing out with the rest of the committee? Do you see any shifts to the Fed being able to act independently?
I think that the committee, the FOMC, is set up in such a way that a new incoming chair, like any chair, has to get the trust and confidence of the whole committee in order to make changes in policy. So the chair has to act based on data, has to act based on reasonable forecasts and an assessment of those risks in a way that convinces other members of the committee that moving or not moving is the right thing to do. So the checks and balances that are built into the system will keep the Fed independent and focused on our goals.